Hello, everybody. I'm Jonathan Armstrong from Punter, Southall Law. I'm pleased to say that Eric Sinrod is with me for TechLaw10 number 294. We're heading towards the 300 mark. So thanks, everyone, for listening. Of course, you can still use whatever search engine you love to search TechLaw10 and find the other 293 podcasts if you want to. But today we're dealing with something pretty topical. President Trump has announced that there is an action plan on AI, which a lot of people are talking about. Is it a suspension of AI regulation in the US? Eric, demystify it for us, please.
Well, first, thank you for pointing out the 294. Wow, almost 300. I think we started long ago and far away in the year 2011. We were not
Wow.
talking about AI then, but today, yes, we're going to be talking about the U.S. Federal AI Action Plan. It's somewhat complex. This whole area is complex. I'm going to try to make it simple with a little bit of an overview and then a little bit of simplicity regarding the concept of removing regulatory roadblocks. So yes, the White House released on July 23rd of this year its recent AI action plan titled Removing Barriers to American Leadership in Artificial Intelligence. And the AI action plan identifies, Jonathan, over 90 federal policy actions across three pillars that the Trump administration plans to address. First, accelerating AI innovation. Second, building American AI infrastructure. And third, leading international AI diplomacy and security. In addition to launching this AI action plan, during a recent summit, President Trump signed three executive orders. One, preventing supposed woke AI in federal government. Another, accelerating permitting of data center infrastructure. And then thirdly, promoting the export of American AI technology stack. Importantly, the Trump administration seeks to accelerate AI innovation, as I hinted, by removing regulatory roadblocks and supposed ideological biases. To speed up the building of U.S. AI infrastructure, the Trump administration intends to modify the environmental permitting system and fast-track energy projects. Internationally, the Trump administration will actively promote U.S. exports and work with apparent like-minded countries to advocate an international AI governance approach aligned with our administration's values. Government officials describe the potential of AI to usher in, quote, an industrial revolution, an information revolution, and a renaissance all at once, close quote. Okay, that's the little overview. Are you intrigued? Are you intrigued?
I am intrigued.
There's more, but go on. Do you want to say something?
No, I was intrigued by that, and I was intrigued by the interaction. Maybe you're going to cover it between federal government and states, because some states are looking at regulation. They're going to be disincentivized by the withdrawal of funding.
Well, stay with me, my friend.
Yeah.
You're anticipating just a tad the inquiring mind of one Jonathan Armstrong. The theme of the Trump administration approach is that the U.S. private sector must be unencumbered by bureaucratic red tape. So the action plan asserts that AI is too vital, quote, to smother in bureaucracy, close quote, and may limit, and at this stage of development, whether at the state or federal level, we must address this concern. And the AI action plan recommends several policy actions to reduce regulatory barriers. First, federal agencies administering AI-related discretionary funding programs must consider a state's AI regulatory climate when making funding decisions and may limit funding if state level regulations are hindering the effectiveness of federally supported projects. I know I'm speaking a little quickly just because there's so much here and we have so little time. Secondly, the Federal Trade Commission will evaluate whether state AI regulations interfere with its responsibilities. Next, the federal government will launch a request for information to gather input from businesses and the public about existing federal regulations that hinder AI innovation and will work with relevant agencies to take appropriate action. And then finally, all FTC, Federal Trade Commission, investigations initiated under the prior administration, along with final orders, consent decrees, and injunctions, will be reviewed to ensure they do not advance theories of liability that unduly burden AI innovation. So clearly, the thrust here is just, AI unfettered, go forward, let's remove barriers, full steam ahead. Now, to your point,
and there has been activity in that area, hasn't there? I can think of FTC settlements with do not pay, for example, over their legal services disguised as not legal services, which some say were dishonest, and the FTC took action. And the intention is to review all that body of work as well.
That's right. And then I just want to point out, I think to your original question, I mean, yes, in certain, technology spheres, if you will, states do regulate technology. And just as an example, and there are many, but data breach notification laws, we see those at the state level all across the country. And then in wholly separate arenas, we see the federal government basically ceding to the states legal control, if you will, right now, pursuant to the Supreme Court, et cetera. The issue related to abortion is decided at the state level. But here we see sort of top down from the federal government trying to clear away that which may hinder the advance of AI. And of course, we know that the AI train is way out of the station. This grand experiment is happening. But I know I've said a lot, so I'd love to hear what you have to say and what's happening on your side of the pond.
Yeah, I think it is fascinating. And obviously, we're doing our best to present the facts as they are, and we're trying to be somewhat politically neutral about these things. But I think there's definitely a different approach over here. Taking the UK, for example, first of all, we had an announcement in the King's Speech when the new administration took over that there would be AI regulation. We don't know the exact shape and form that will take in the UK, but that's likely, I think, to be something of a halfway house between the laissez-faire plus approach, if I can call it that the US is having, and the EU. Now, of course, over the weekend, we had another phase of the EU AI Act come in. So we've now got three main bodies of that act that are in force now. First, dealing with prohibited AI. So that's things like facial recognition. Some recruitment related apps could fall within that prohibition. Secondly, the requirement on AI literacy that we've talked about in an earlier podcast, this obligation to educate your workforce on AI. And by the way, saying they don't use AI isn't good enough. McKinsey tell us in a recent survey, 90% of employees do it, whether you ban it or not. And then thirdly, the bit that came in this weekend was around GPAI, which is a bit similar to GenAI. GenAI will be GPAI, but GPAI could be broader. And a voluntary code has also come in. Voluntary to start off with, will be mandatory later, which is looking at that GPI regulation bit. And here I think there's some interest. The GPAI code deals with transparency, copyright, and then safety and security. This code came in on the 10th of July. As I say, it goes hand in hand as a voluntary code with the mandatory regulation of GPAI. But what I think is interesting here is that the GPAI providers are allowed to sign up to the code voluntarily. We don't yet have the official list from the European Commission as to who signed up, because that was only available on the 2nd of August. We're sort of filming this on the 5th of August. But I can tell you that OpenAI said they would sign up. Microsoft said they probably would be signing. And only, I think, Meta of the large US tech corporations had said they definitely wouldn't. So the interesting thing, it seems to me, partly there, is that some of the US corporations, which seemingly President Trump is trying to protect from regulation in the US, are signing up for additional regulation that isn't mandatory in the EU, which seems to me to be somewhat of an interesting contrast, really. Of course, we've said this on these podcasts before, even though there are only 3 substantial bits of the EU AI Act in force, that doesn't mean to say that that AI is unregulated. So a lot of the decisions under GDPR are broadly similar to FTC type decisions. We've had dawn raids to look at use of AI, to look at AI training data. So a dawn raid on an organization to see how it was training its AI and where it was getting training data from. We've had fines like Clearview, like Deliveroo, that we've talked about before. And we've had suspensions. DeepSeek, for example, is currently still, I believe, suspended in Italy. ChatGPT was, Replica AI is. So a lot of activity, particularly in Italy, in Spain, and Ireland, to use GDPR to sort of discipline the provision of AI. So it seems to me that it's a very different approach. The EU AI office is an independent part of the EU institutions. It's got about 140 employees. There's some open positions there, but this is very much a jump into a regulated industry environment, I think, in direct contrast to the approach you've outlined that President Trump is taking.
I think that's right. And so, where do you think things will go globally? Because the world is a small place. And let's just assume a scenario where AI is less regulated in the US vis-a-vis the EU.
Well, I think it leads to all sorts of conflicts, doesn't it? I mean, there has been talk of the so-called stop the clock, that a group of organizations, again, I think largely US organizations, lobbied the European authorities to suspend or slow down the enactment of the EU AI Act. The European Commission have given that short shrift and said it isn't being suspended. It's wishful thinking if you think it is. We have seen people saying that AI regulation is a fetter on innovation, and that the US is also is already at a commercial advantage in terms of AI development, and that the EU AI Act, disadvantages EU-based organizations. I think it's a really complex world, particularly when we have people visiting Europe from the Trump administration and saying that things like regulation of US tech corporations will be taken into account when looking at things like the funding of the defense of Ukraine. And there are high stakes here. But as I say, the thing that I struggle with is the fact that some of the corporations that Trump is wishing to support by relaxing regulation in the US are signing up for voluntary regulation here.
Well, that was my next question before we go in. Why do you think that is? Why are the US tech companies signing up for additional regulation overseas, whereas the path is being cleared to be less regulated here in the United States?
I think some in the past have been supportive of more regulation. I think this could easily be Tech Law 400, but I know that there was a theory when GDPR came in, for example, that if we regulate US corporations more heavily, then a Phoenix-like startup will rise from the ashes of Europe and knock Google and Microsoft and Meta out of the park. I think personally, I always think that was wishful thinking. And I think whenever you look at the effect of regulation, quite often it's large corporations who can afford that. If you're spending 50 billion euros on AI per annum, then guess what? You can afford good lawyers and regulatory professionals to help you through the regulatory regime. If you're a startup with a bright idea operating on whatever you can borrow on your own credit cards out of your parents' back bedroom, guess what? You're unlikely to be able to afford good lawyers. You won't find your way through the regulation. So I think quite often this theory that regulating levels the playing field is quite often incorrect. And that's maybe where US corporations will have some advantage. But of course, the rubber hits the road when they move out of the US market. And with AI, that's normally nanoseconds. You know, there are very few domestic AI providers. Maybe the US market is sustainable, and maybe you can make a profit just on selling AI into the US. But for many corporations who've got global ambitions, I think you are going to have to meet your regulatory responsibilities. And the US is an outlier. It's not just the EU that's looking at more AI regulation. That's the pattern across Asia and down into Australasia as well. So if you want to go global, you're going to have to take the regulations into account.
Well said, my friend. Well, I believe when we get to Tech Law 400, we'll probably be still talking about AI. This is here to stay, and we'll have more to say then. Well, I'm Eric Sinrod at Duane Morris. I'm based on our San Francisco and Silicon Valley offices. My email address is ejsinrod@duanemorris.com. As always, Jonathan, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks very much, Eric. Really enjoyed this discussion here. Jonathan.Armstrong@puntersouthall.law. We'll put our contact details along the bottom of the screen. If you're watching it on YouTube, there'll be more text and links below. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Do come back and listen again. Do suggest topics. And all that remains is to thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.